So thanks for participating. I was hoping to get some speakers on board for this discussion. Luckily, you chipped in.
Hi.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, Andreas.
Hey.
Hi, everybody. Hello.
Hello.
Hey, Sam, still awake?
Hey.
Yeah, made it.
Very good.
So what are we about?
Yeah, well, that's the big question. Actually, this session was inspired by the topic of Lucas Ernie. He was talking about this boilerplate approach. And while we were putting together the schedule, we were like, yeah, kind of everybody is doing that. So everybody has an own way to start working on a Silverstripe project, right? So do you create it with Composer and do you use a recipe, or do you have something prepared on your own? Stuff like that. So it basically was supposed to be a talk about, how do you do your project bootstrapping when it comes to Silverstripe? And that was the main thought behind that. So I think from really a Silverstripe point of view, I think recipes are already an approach to achieve something like that, right?
Yeah, I mean that was the idea, as well as being, I guess, a Composer, like a virtual package, with all the dependencies in there. It also had this kind of facility for creating, initial files and the thing. So I think you can add a recipe to a project and it will copy some files like page.php and a default underscore config and things in that. So that's what they were designed for. I know it's not the only way that these things go, but that's I think the way a lot of our crew uses it. It's funny, I don't actually create new projects that often. Often I wind up doing it a little bit by hand as well, just because often I'm doing something like a little bit unusual, like with the risk management app. It wasn't like a CMS project, it was more like an admin one. So often I guess I find it easy enough just to sort of copy and paste the files in there. So I don't have a very sophisticated set of recipe tools myself.
Okay. Well, we've just been prompted in the session chat if we can wait a couple of more minutes for some people still to join us. But I think the 5 of us will be the active participants of that session. So let's see. Actually, I have to check out if there's a chance for me to check how many viewers we have. Should be.
Is it 18 on the right top?
I see the numbers. Oh, I see that one.
Yeah, I see 18.
Yeah, probably that's the one, the counter for all the people that are in the Hop-in event, but I'm not sure if. Okay.
Oh, we lost someone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'd say when we hit 20, we can start. Okay?
Sounds good.
All right. Okay, good. Andy is telling all the people to join us here in the event chat. There's already a question for you, Sam, in the session chat.
Oh, there we go. Look at that. Any idea if there will be a better upgrade at all? I think, there's definitely ideas for how it can be improved. I think, the idea of using a static analysis tool so that things like particular function calls could have their message signatures changed, which means you kind of need to know what the object type is that you're calling the method on. So tools like PHP Stan can kind of provide some of the bones for that. Not sure, when that would happen. Nothing specific for that one. It consumed quite a lot of time already. Yeah.
Okay, so I'd say we are good to go. We have nearly 30 viewers. And yeah, let's kick this off. Thanks, Lucas, for joining us.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey.
As I told the other guys, this session was actually inspired by the topic of your talk. And maybe we can start by asking you what your basic intentions behind your boilerplate plates have been. So why did you start working on that?
Yeah, I think you did as well. This is, I think many people do that and have something like that available, and all have their own ideas how it should look. And this is probably why you do such a thing. Basically, it is to collect those snippets and stuff. What I do to keep it in one repo. That's the intention, to save some time. But I wonder who is having something similar, or how do you handle that?
I too. I've got most of my kind of snippets within one module, one extension, which is installed on all the sites I do. And so it consists of lots of little tweaks to sort of start hiding things that I think the majority of my clients don't need, adding in a few little extras here and there, and there's a half a dozen base modules that all my sites use. So most of mine are within one module. Currently, I just do literally have a folder that I just duplicate effectively for each new project, because there's some extra things that can't easily be built into that. But I am looking at converting that into a recipe when I get some time.
Okay, and you're actively maintaining this module for yourself? Because I heard from a lot of people that they started developing something like that, but it always got deprecated after a while.
Oh, right. No, this module is still used on every project I create today. It's still out there. I'll stick a link up. I'd be more than happy to take you through some of the things quite quickly that are within it, if that's of interest. But it's not really designed. It's not really intended for other people to use as is, because there's a few kind of specific things to the business and the way I work. It's more. I put it out there for anyone to just have a look through it, and any tweaks that people like, feel free to steal for their own projects or own module.
Okay. So you've put it to the session chat, right? So
yeah.
We'll have a quick look at that. You got me curious on that. Thomas, Andreas, what about you guys?
Well, I think a main concern always is every project is different, I think. So for us, it's always a big important asking to ask ourselves, do we need something to kick off for every project, or do we just, like we're doing now, collecting all the stuff and files and extensions we have, we know they'll work for this project, and others keeping them out. And of course, we do this like with own extensions or with modules, like, of course, Fluent and Elemental. And there is some kind of basic setup, but it's not a recipe. It's not an extensions. It's just pulling all the things together, because we don't have we're a small company and don't have lots of time to share it on GitHub or anything else. So that's how we do it now. But I'm very curious how others are dealing with that, to have something there for very different kind of projects, because every project is unique.
Well, say that definitely have done this, and we have spent quite a lot of time working with it. We have something called Project Base. That's just our naming for it. It's basically a Git repository that we will update and have a composer JSON file with the modules we need and all the different kind of things we tend to use on each project. So it's a combination of modules and just code that gets copied for every new project. I can definitely say we have had a few versions of it, and we spent a lot of time updating and upgrading, and so it's really the thing about getting what should be modules, what should be something that we just copy and change. It's definitely been an issue for us. It's something that costs us quite a lot of time. And I think it's quite an interesting talk, this one. We just talked about it here in the break, that one of the things I see many Stripe developers are actually asking for. As a developer, I see people are asking for like deployment flows that are easier and faster. But as a owner of a small company, what I'm really looking at is how do I compete with someone selling something like WordPress, for instance, that can have a very cheap project up and running at no cost, and they have a lot of basic features. So that's another point for me, that I want a good set of features from my clients that we don't need to code for every single project. So Elementor is a good example, right?
Yeah.
And I think a part of that, it's not just the modules you choose to bring together. It's often also like, oh, there are a few bugs in these modules, or module A doesn't work nicely with module B. So I think it's not only about the tool you have for kind of maintaining that skeleton. It's also that the cross-checking of all the modules you use with all of the other modules. And that was sort of where we kind of ended up on this recipe idea of kind of basically saying, here's a bunch of modules and let's test that they all work kind of nicely with each other. Even if you don't necessarily use all of those modules on every project, it's still kind of like it's a useful way of kind of checking a complete thing. It also lets you deal with less obviously broken things like, oh, the modules call the same, have the same kind of feature in two different ways, or call the same thing two different names in two different modules. That those kind of consistencies.
Okay, so I get the impression that most of the developers are going the let's say project base approach. So I learned, Andreas, you guys are doing that. James, you shared your repo with us, and Thomas, you have that really project-based repository. Sam, would you say this is fine, or is there another approach from a perspective?
No. I mean, like there's a lot of different things. It's pretty common that everyone kind of has their own base, and I think that's natural, because the idea of having one base that sort of meets everyone's needs is not hugely realistic. Everyone's got their monitoring or logging tools. Everyone's got their own deployment. Everyone's got their own hosting. Everyone's just got their own kind of favorite little things that they like. And, our teams that build websites, as well as the sort of, I guess, the recipes, which are on the one hand are kind of like a core that's quite lean. And then on the other hand, CWP, which is like a government thing. Those are two recipes we produce, but our team has also got its own, what we call the project skeleton, which is, it's just something you can plug into Composer create project. So if you're not familiar with the create project command of Composer, it's a very straightforward way of turning a template Git repo into something that you use. So you can run like Composer create project, a Composer package name, and it will copy that. It'll delete the Git details. You can specify a version of it you want to use, and I think that's how the install instructions of Silverstripe kind of have it, and you can make your own ones very easily, just as a sort of a starting point. So yeah, I think it's pretty natural. I think the interesting thing comes down to what do you put in the recipe and what do you have as in a module that's included from the recipe, because basically it comes down to which of these things for new sites do you just want it to be added to new sites, and which of these things are you wanting that change to be applied to every site that you've built on this recipe historically. And that can be kind of hard, because rolling in some cool new feature is not necessarily something all of those customers are going to want. Maybe it sort of changes their experience. Maybe it puts new expectations on them. Maybe it's just confusing. So you've got to kind of decide, do I want to roll this all out to everyone, or do I want this? But you can kind of allow for both if you have like your skeleton or your base sort of repo, which is what you call create project in, and then one of the modules that skeleton includes is like a core, like a no-brainer web core module or something like that, which is basically the thing that gets applied to all the modules. Because you put something into core, because it's an include, everyone gets that. You put something into the skeleton, only new projects get that. So sort of having both of them can work well.
And how do you handle updating it? I mean, this is something I ask myself. I mean, I put some efforts into that, and what it ends up is like manual up-merging it to a project. Or how would you deal with that?
That's where having a module that the skeleton includes, and the module contains all that stuff you want to apply to everyone.
That's just the way it is.
Well, I mean, no. If you've got a module, because you make your module, you make the Lucas module. All of your projects have the Lucas module, and so then if you make a change to the Lucas module, on all your individual projects, you just call Composer Update. You see what I mean? Yeah.
What we can do with Composer, but not everything is a module in my experience, and also recipes start to fall apart at some point. I mean, we had
everything can be a module, I think. Well, I'm assuming
everything can, but probably not the whole project can be composed of modules all the time, since you sometimes just have to have glue codes from different modules to actually make that experience. This is at least how I see it, and it's difficult to have everything encapsulated in modules.
Yeah, I guess it's the advantage of having everything encapsulated in modules. So it's like working to try and make that happen, figure out what the gaps, what the blockers are, and doing that. I mean, like if there are reasons for why, this code can't be in a module, it's like, why? How do we fix that? Because ideally, all code could be in a module.
One of the issues I ran into, so with my module that is largely a collection of small extensions just to make little tweaks. So, for example, one of them just hides the page permissions fields in the CMS just to declutter on websites that most of the websites I do are not required. And so, yeah, very simple extension, just simply hides those fields. One of the issues I ran into, though, with Silverstripe 4 is on the very occasional site when I would want to enable those fields to the user and so disable the extension which hides them. Disabling or removing an extension seems to remove all other extensions from say page. So it's not possible to simply just remove that one extension. And what I had to do in Silverstripe 4 in the end was update my little extensions to check for a config a variable, and so that I would just say show fields in the config. Technically, I suppose an argument would be to put those in the initial skeleton, and then I could just remove them there. But then I kind of like the idea that further down the line, as updates change, say those the page permissions fields were changed in the future version of Silverstripe, I would just be able to change how that's dealt with in my main module and still know that they'll be hidden on all sites instead of having to update every single site. So yeah, there's downsides to both ways, I suppose.
Could also get granular, and you could have a remove to tidy up my fields module as like a very small module, and then you can just include that or not include that. And it's one approach to it. You do end up with a lot of modules, and there's a certain maintenance effort to each one of those. It's not huge, but the micro packages are popular with the Node community, so why not do it too? But like that's one thing, and I think you can do stuff where you can say you have blocks of config that you enable or disable. I just can't remember how to do that.
I just read what House wrote here. You used to have a module for like team page. That's one of the things I kept running into, like because that's obviously something most of our websites are just B2B presentation sites, so they will have much of the same what's that called, structure and model, and I really like having those kind of all the page types. I don't like them as much as would be kind of in the app, so that's something which the skeleton provides, and you can't really have modules for that. But I guess somewhere we put a lot of things into the skeleton that should have been modules, and previously we tried to use more modules, but I think that's kind of the issues to get the balance right of what those were.
I mean, one thing to kind of bear in mind is that your project is just like, from Silverstripe's perspective, your project is just another module. It's like if you have your code in like app/source with app/_config, Silverstripe's got like a list of modules, and one of them's app, and one of them's like vendor Silverstripe CMS, and one of them's vendor something or other, something like that. Like it's just a pile of modules. So I don't think there's any fundamental difference about what is a module and what's not. It's more what's a logical way of structuring your code. And I think for me, what's specific to this project versus what's potentially shared is more important than is it somehow by its essential nature a module or not a module.
Yeah.
And certainly I think when we've had recipes with a lot of stuff in the recipe and it hasn't been a module, and then people have said, oh, how do I use that? And it's like, oh, you can only use it if you use all of this other crap too. So then, oh, yeah, why isn't it a module? And it's like, yes, it should have been a module. Like it's rare that, I guess it's been rare that it's like, oh, we shouldn't have made that a module. Whereas it's been quite common that it's like, oh, we should have made that a module. So it seems like more stuff should be modules than what's happened in the past. And the only time, I guess, where I've seen people being like, oh, it's a bit overkill to make that a module has been where something really is specific functionality for one site. And then they thought, oh, well, maybe it'll be reusable, but it wasn't. So it just became this extra hassle to maintain the module.
Now, one thing I also struggle with is like, I mean, we have elemental, and if I say let's have this example with a stuff page, and then I build it and have some custom styles for it, but where do we actually keep those styles? I mean, usually they're different from project to project, but we do not have a build system for every module. This is actually the point, what I wanted to make. Well, that just makes it difficult to share some things, to me at least. I think it's like, well, build it, and then I have to keep it in the project, because otherwise I would have my own build system for that, and this is just not something I would like to do.
Usually open source, and so we just use Travis. Is that the kind of build system you mean?
No. I mean like the build system for front end stuff, like Laravel mixin or whatever Webpack stuff. Those stuff that also is needed, but it's just not feasible to have an own stack in every module. For me,
you could, but yeah, I mean that does get quite awkward, and that's definitely something that's awkward in core. I mean, you could have a build system in your project that is referencing assets from composer modules. So it's like, oh, I'm going to look in vendor Lucas common module thing.
Yeah, probably this would be an approach, but I haven't managed to set up something like that.
Yeah. I guess it's less about is that a good idea or not. It's more about everything could be made into a module if you wanted.
Sorry, just somebody popped in.
Classic. So one more thing about recipes, Sam, do you have any idea how much this is actually being used by the community? Because a lot of people I talk to, they always say, nah, we don't use it. We always start right from framework only and then patch it up with all the stuff we need, but without the recipe way.
Yeah, so I guess the first thing to kind of acknowledge is that recipes are not just about using. They are also about they're basically a way of making sure we do the test everything with everything else. I definitely don't think that the idea of a recipe is that you have to use the recipe or you're doing it wrong if you're not using the recipe. The recipes are designed to kind of give an easy default for people who'd rather not think about it too much. But a lot of Silverstripe developers, they've been using Silverstripe for a long time, and so they're quite happy to do it themselves. I was just going to open up framework stats and sort of see where we're at. So we're at about 700 downloads a day on packages for recipe core, and about 800 downloads a day for framework. So it looks like roughly 7/8.
Recipes are getting close. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I think it's well more than half, more than 3/4. The figures aren't perfect, but I'd say that lots of people do use recipes, but not everyone. And I think the idea is that, well, if the recipe doesn't quite give you what you want, you use the individual packages. And to go to someone's comment, was it Werner or someone said, keep the recipe, lean. It's like, well, the point is, we don't have to keep the recipe lean. Like we could, and we probably will, but it's like, if you want a really lean, mean silver stripe, it's like, use the packages. And we're gonna, go even further with that. Like, just use ORM. Like, it's as lean as it gets. Just use core. You get injector and the config and like the module management and like nothing else. It's like, that's about as lean as it gets. So you'll be able to kind of mix and match your own things. And I think this pattern of individual sort of dev shops having their skeleton or their, their own kind of libraries that mix and match Silverstripe to have a kind of a configuration of it that suits them. I think that's very healthy and slightly inevitable. And then we have these recipes of like, well, we've tested all this stuff together, so we know it works nicely. If you're new to Silverstripe, this is probably a good place to start, but it's not necessarily what we'd even recommend to advanced developers. Just a thought.
I'm just browsing through the comments a little bit, and Ingo Chilus said something interesting, because he says Elemental is a great example where small units can be encapsulated for reuse in modules. While this is true, the thing is with Elemental, there's something like a base module that defines how a block should look like, and then you can derive your own stuff, and this can really be small bits. So this is also an interesting approach, I'd say. Or phrased as a question, who created in this round an own Elemental block so far as a module?
I have. What?
So yeah, this is apparently already happening.
Yeah, so everyone except me, I think.
You can't do everything, right? Yeah.
You blame more of the ORM and model admin side these days.
Elemental is actually a good example for many things. For me in particular, it's this thing about providing value from the get-go. I actually think that's quite an issue to me. When you're doing a Silverstripe site, there's a lot of things it's very good at. Like Sam showed earlier, you can do something custom. You can show a spin-off fast, show it to the customer. But if you're going to do a small, cheap website, what the amount of work I will have to put in a Silverstripe solution to even small templates, WordPress is, not really. That's where I think this. I agree with Sam that everyone will have their own templates. That's for sure. But I also think we could improve the product by having some. I don't know if it should be finding a lot of Elemental modules, just so that the user, when having a site, there's a lot more they can actually do afterwards. The developer so decide.
Yeah, definitely, and I know that that's something our team we're working on in the context of the CWP recipe, and I think Ingo might want to. Ingo knows more about this than me, but I think there's like a Elemental plus a few blocks kind of sub recipe that you could kind of pull in. But it's like any of these recipes that are sort of batteries included, they inevitably feel bloated to some. And so, there's that. It's finding that balance, and I think what winds up happening is everybody finds that balance.
I actually don't think that anyone.
There we go. Gary just posted the link. There's a recipe content blocks, which it might be useful to kind of pull into your. Just had a few blocks. It's quite lean. It doesn't really have. It's got like user forms, files, banners, a few other bits and pieces.
Well, I hear the word WordPress a lot, which is odd.
Sorry.
No, I heard it throughout the morning sometimes, but I always say it's hard to compare the two because I think the basic approach is different, and the limitations are very different too. I've never done a WordPress project, of course, but I think there is an own market for having commercial plugins and modules, right? Because with Silverstripe, we don't have that at all, I think. Or is there something going on with commercial modules for Silverstripe that I just don't know?
No, I mean, we haven't done much. I mean, I think some people have done commercialization of stuff elsewhere. I think the selling of the modules is probably not so much of a thing as the having them available, because there's a lot of good blocks out there. It's just getting them to work nicely together, and frankly, having a bunch more modules written by independent people is unlikely to kind of have them working nicely together either. I think it's more a kind of curation activity is the back gap, is to kind of like see which ones are out there, pull them all at once, make sure they don't trip over each other's toes, kind of polish them up. And this is, none of it's kind of rocket science. It is just kind of work. There used to be a translation module for sale, but that was like 200 years ago. Yeah, it's like there's a certain scale that WordPress has that makes even selling 1% of 1% like enough to kind of like make it viable, which doesn't work in smaller communities. So that's why it hasn't really been something we've driven. And now I think there's also like a lot of other commercialization opportunities. Like I saw that there's a general thing for kind of Git or Composer that lets you sell modules. There's a lot of like sponsorship kind of packages and the like. So those would probably be interesting things to try for Silverstripe modules rather than having a commercial arm dedicated solely to Silverstripe modules.
Yeah, I like the idea of the sponsor side. There's a few, because GitHub now has got a sponsor option. There's a few developers that I sponsor just because I value their Silverstripe modules so much. And I think in some ways it would be nice to maybe have a kind of a centered approach on that, highlighting, say, the sponsorship, the ones that are open for sponsorship on, say, the Silverstripe add-on site, or just some kind of more authorized. But if you want to be able to support Silverstripe modules, then
definitely. I mean, like exposing that metadata on the add-on site would be a good place to start. It's open source. Pull requests. We're waiting for your pull requests. I mean, there's a lot of good ideas. I think this is the problem that we often have, is that there's more ideas than time, and so it's like, it's a great idea. We've talked a number of times about doing that, and it's never quite made it to the top of the list. And that's just the kind of the reality of it sometimes. But I mean, it's one of the reasons why we do try to make the ecosystem sites open source repos as well, so that they are available for pull requests.
Well, another question about themes, maybe, because we have been talking a lot about modules and recipes. When it comes to themes, I don't know if it's just us, or is somebody using multiple themes in one website or one web application? Because in our theme folder, there's always one subfolder.
Default.
Johannes does.
So the question is, are you guys really using this feature? And maybe I just didn't get that from the beginning on, but Sam, where was the intention for the theme switcher?
Yeah, so themes goes all the way back to like Silverstripe 2.3 or something like that, and it was introduced when we first introduced a blog module. I mean, got to have themes for a blog, right? But it's for the most part, it hasn't really fitted with, kind of how Silverstripe uses, which is usually Silverstripe's used by professional designers to do professionally designed websites. And it's not really used by people who aren't tech to kind of download a theme and get their blog going. It's just not what it's optimized for. So the use of themes has been fairly limited. I think the place where it does get used is if you've got something like subsites. And so you can have a subsite set up where you can have several themes and you can choose the theme that applies to a subsite. The other thing is that secretly, if you use Silverstripe 4, all of you use multiple themes, because in actual fact, every single module is its own theme, and it has like a cascade of themes. So it basically has a priority order in it that goes through all the modules looking for templates or other assets. The first one it finds that matches, it says, here you go. So the other way of sort of saying it is that your module is a theme. We used to have in Silverstripe 3 like themes template handling and regular module template handling, and they were kind of a path. And so in Silverstripe 4, like these two paths are silly. We just kind of roll them all together. So there's no real need to use a themes folder if you've just got one theme. You can just have, app and my site and templates and CSS and what have you in that folder. That's totally valid. Serve themes for just times when you have a switcher.
We actually removed the themes part. We don't even have the themes folder anymore, but I'm actually considering introducing it again because and this is kind of a question, right? Does it make sense to have a theme? Let's say you have just for overriding, you have let's say you have a set of default elements blocks templates, and you can just have it in your theme, and you will have a project-specific theme, and copy the templates over there that you need to make changes to. Is that an option?
And so the thing is, it doesn't need to be a theme. What you've described can just be like a module as well. Like there's no difference between the two now. It doesn't, and it can be, you can make it a vendor module, so it'll just drop into vendor no-brainer web base theme or whatever it is, or something else. But
but that's what we're doing right now.
That's good.
There was a stage when I thought that with Silverstripe 4, the best practice was to have your templates inside app, and so that's what I did. And I think that partly came from the Silverstripe 4 lessons that Cheese wrote. I think that's how he prefers to do it, and so that's where the templates folder is. But I ran into issues. So when I customized the breadcrumbs template for the front end breadcrumbs, and then discovered that the CMS picked that up and it was using it because it was in app. And when I raised that as a bug, I was basically told, you're still best to use themes rather than putting your templates in app.
Okay. I guess programming's hard. Like that, to be blunt, that sounds like one of those things where one group of people had one view and another group of people had another view, and you interacted with the two different groups of people at two different times. Certainly what we've there would be other ways of approaching that. I mean, we might get into issues where there are we could fix it, but not without potentially breaking people's sites. I mean, I know, for instance, with the forms, we had this notion of like an admin forms. We had a few additional themes that were basically just for the administrative area, and so all of the special HTML for building the admin went into those. I think there's like Bootstrap forms, which is an admin forms overrides that or something. What you can also do is you can probably remove the app folder from the render queue, from the set of themes being processed for the themes. I don't know how to do that. It might not be something we want to enable by default because it might break a bunch of people's sites. But if there's not a config option for it at the moment, that's probably how we do. Because basically, there's just an ordered list of modules or themes. So modules or subfolders of a module. And it just goes through that ordered list, and you can configure that list. So you can remove items from that list, add items to the top, or add items to the bottom. And by default, it basically just gets a list of all all the Silverstripe modules and says, look through all of these, which replicates the Silverstripe 3 behavior of allowing templates in modules.
I see some comments about vulnerabilities and security here. Annie, for example, asked, do you think having security baked into the core of Silverstripe is a competitive advantage over younger and more trendy CMSs?
Like, it certainly is with the customers we work with directly, because we work with government and banks, power companies, and all that kind of stuff. So this is why we spend so much time on it, and it's a lot of time spent. So I'd say yes for us. Hopefully for other people too.
Yeah, and this is really a scenario where there's no reason creating a module, because why would anybody not opt for a module that just increases security, just increases that? So I'm afraid that's really something that kind of has to come from you guys, Sam.
Yeah, it's less about the features and it's more about the process that you go through. So there's a lot of, for the stuff we do with government, there's before it gets released, there's an extra step of auditing and things. Mm-hmm. And we try to bake as much of that into the flow, but you're right. Security is not something you can kind of sprinkle on at the end. It's more about the process you go through to make the things. So,
yeah, that's more an aspect and not something you patch at the end of a project. Yeah, you're kind of right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of aspect, prior to StripeCon, I dug through all the documentations you have, and there's a section that is not so much on Slack, on Stack Overflow. It's about some programming paradigms, and you also have aspect-oriented programming documented there.
Oh wow, that's quite old.
Yeah, and I think I was wondering if it's still used.
That came in when the injector first came in, and I think the injector does have some hooks for that. I don't think they're very widely used. I think they still work. I think there was Marcus Nieholt who he built Injector, and I think he also sort of built that. And so I think it's sort of part of how Injector works, but I don't know much about how. I don't know much about it. It's not very widely used in core. I'm not sure how widely used it is in the community, but I believe it still works because it's covered by tests.
I see.
Tests, they're magic, yeah.
Well, I think for Silverstripe 4, that one really had me, creating my own classes and services within Silverstripe by using all the traits you have, like the injectable and configurable trait, all that stuff, because in Silverstripe 3 world, I was never sure what do I have to apply to my own service class in order to get all the Silverstripe sugar, like having that singleton logic. I wasn't sure, should I extend just the object class you guys used to ship? But sometimes, with inheritance, I needed to inherit from another class. That was always a little bit of a pickle. And this really helped me in Silverstripe 4, I have to say.
That's good. That's good. And I think it's also it's even a lot of it's still optional. You can still have config map to a class if you don't have the configurable trait. It's just you don't get the little config method. You've got to go config inst get class name. So, and similarly with an injector, you can still use injector. You just don't get that self inst or self singleton or whatever it is. So mainly those traits are adding syntactic sugar for services that you can use with regular things because, for instance, we pull monologue configurations in, and so the logger is basically, an injector defining a monologue object that gets constructed and the like. So, and that's why I guess it's so important that it works that way, so that we are able just to kind of pull in other packages and not have to wrap them in a Silverstripe layer before they'll work with us, because that's just a pain. That increases coupling. Mm.
Well, are there any questions or comments from our viewers? I see you guys already started a separate discussion about security and audits and all of that stuff.
I would defer to Ingo on that stuff. He does most of the actual work on that.
Okay. So do we already have some takeaways here? I'm not sure if we are already ready to wrap it up, but maybe everybody can shoot 1 or 2 sentences. What are the key takeaways from our discussion? Would that be okay for you? Andreas, you are very quiet the last minutes. You like to start?
Just listening here. No, for me, a reason or a key takeaway, which I hear from you guys as well, is that just, again, I have to mention WordPress, but I think the big thing and advantage to work with Stripe is to create individual customized stuff. And for us, if there is some crazy wishes from our clients, we always have to see, okay, can a module, a plugin, extension, whatever, can handle this, or can we do this on our own to make it perfect for the client very individually? And I think this is where Silverstripe gets in place, because otherwise you have a third-party plugin, extension, or whatever, and see how you can tweak and work around with that. And that's because we for example, when we use Elemental, we just use the very base Silverstripe Elemental module and do all our modules on our own, because everything is very customized for our clients. And because in most cases, we can do exactly what they want. And for me, this it never came to my mind to have some plugin or theme marketplace the WordPress guys have, because it's just a very other approach for making websites and applications.
If I can continue on that, because I absolutely agree. I think everyone here, they do bespoke web design, right? That's at least what I think. Yep. Silverstripe excels at. Yeah. The problem I have here, it's not that problem, but it's like I remember the last couple of years we heard people competing more and more against WordPress, right? That's also the situation. That's what people are asking for, and you need to compare your product. And when you compare it, it's not that there's different. There's advantages for Silverstripe, there's advantages for WordPress in some cases, right? But one of the things that hurts me is that I'm almost more. It's more expensive to do a bespoke project, right? So we are a bit behind there on the price, but also the kind of features of the box are really less. You know, the client is restricted. The good thing, it can be by design, but it's not always by design. So that's where I see that in order to compete, you need to bring more to the table. And I'm not asking Silverstripe to do that. I know that's something we have to do. We have to make our own, like project basis or whatever we call them. But it's just this is something we are looking into.
Yeah, what Thomas said certainly is a reality on the one hand, but on the other hand, you just can ask, so is it like a ready-made or custom built? These are like polarities, and we're somewhere between them and finding some solutions to that. But as in my experience, this is quite a difficult thing. And if I collect things from different places, in the end, what I have is like my Utrecht thing. It's a mess. I mean, you have to clean that up. This is really like hard work because it is from so many places. It gets hard to streamline that things, and that is where I struggle a bit. So I try to encapsulate some functionality, but still, I'm not quite there where I wish I would be.
I recently considered kind of putting together a kind of boilerplate which is more for sites that maybe have only a WordPress budget. And so something that wouldn't necessarily be completely bespokely designed, but almost kind of like a Silverstripe-based website builder. So it would have Elementor built in and a handful of blocks, and I do some very basic template tweaking, so that, yeah, if for smaller budget projects, just being able to launch something like that. I had considered looking at the Bambusa theme. Is it Bambusa? That the new demo uses, and kind of basing it off that. But yeah, again, I think it's really hard to get what would be a one-size-fits-all approach that would meet everyone for that.
Yeah, I think the common pattern is definitely a broader set of elemental blocks that we sort of know look somewhat consistent and work nicely together. And that's a little bit also why I guess having more common approaches amongst modules, and so that's why we sort of try to publish the the module standards and things to say, well, look, this is how we do modules. We've got 100 odd, so if you do modules like that as well, there'll sort of there'll be some commonality. But I think more elemental blocks that people can trust is sort of a big part of, I think, achieving that goal.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with you, James. And I think the most important thing being said in that session was that there is no silver bullet how to do that whole boilerplating. It's always, a custom approach, how you deal with modules, with your theme is, if there's a theme folder at all, if you pull from, or if you fork a repository that is your skeleton, if you deal with recipes or not. So there really isn't one official best practice way, but I think it really much depends on the company size and the kind of websites you are building or web applications. So that's already, for me, it's good to know, because that proves that we are not doing something wrong, but just our way. And it was good to hear that you guys work with the same principle when it comes to that.
May I ask one question that came up during the talk? Does anybody have a build or Webpack system that looks into module folders? Does anybody have something like that working? I wonder.
Yeah, I don't know of one, but it was just an idea.
You should build it, Lucas.
No, certainly not me. That's out of my comfort zone.
Then you can present it next year.
No. Finish what I've started, probably, or bring it more to a final state. Probably this is the aim.
Okay, all right. So last chance for our viewers to shoot questions and comments before we wrap this up here. Any more questions from the famous Johannes?
No stupid questions, Johannes, really?
It's not the same without him sitting in the front row.
There you go. And the noise from the crowd when he raises his hand and everybody's like, all right, guys. So thanks a lot for joining our discussion. We'll have a 10-minute break, and then Herbert is going on stage with like a Silverstripe 101 course. So for all our viewers who are not Silverstripe pros, it's definitely worth checking that one out. And bear with us, because the last slot of the day will then be from Werner Kraus, WMK, about local development environments. A very relevant topic, I think. Yeah, so see you soon. And to my fellow speakers, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.